live from my childhood bedroom, actually, visiting in NC, talking a little conference championships here. I got Matt from Eagle Up joining us with his Eagles in the NFC Championship. And, of course, Rob, as always. Fellas, how we doing?
What's going on, guys? How's everyone doing?
Good, man. Good. We got a big weekend ahead of us. Another big one. I think the playoffs is so fun to talk about every year. So fired up to get into it.
Let's go as always. Rob with both of his Super Bowl contenders still alive. He projected that. You predicted that in our Week 17 discussion. We kind of started gearing towards the playoffs a little bit. And before that Week 17 show, or in that Week 17 show, you actually had the Niners and Bengals facing off in the Super Bowl. So this is going to be a fun one, talking through these matchups. We got Matt in here. I feel like I should also clarify, even though this is my childhood bedroom, there's no more guy stuff on the wall. I've got flowers behind me here. I'm kind of taking it over and decorated. So I feel like I should clarify this since this is going up on YouTube as well. But Matt, let's get right into it, man. Your Eagles looked phenomenal last week. You predicted the score to be 34-20. I remember asking you last week on the show, do you think that's going to be a blowout type of 34-20, or do they kind of close it out towards the end of the game, maybe some garbage time points? You thought it's close going into the fourth, and then they kind of extend that lead and run away with it there. It was not close 4 minutes into that game. It was all she wrote. The Eagles really flexing their muscles and showing who they have been all season. It really was a very, very impressive showing. I did not think the Giants would win. I think we all had the Eagles winning here. But for the showing that they had to just absolutely annihilate someone by halftime, 28-0 at halftime that's really saying something. They came out ready. They came out absolutely ready. What's your takeaways, if any, other than let's go from that Eagles game last week?
Well, my takeaway, first and foremost, is that you can see that they're locked in. There was a lot of commotion and everything going on with the Giants that they might come into Philly and, kind of smack them in the mouth, keep it close. But right from the jump, he hit Devontae Smith on a deep crossing route, and it was awesome. And right at that point, I knew that this team was locked in. Their offense was going to do great, and it was strictly that. I mean, you saw the offensive line completely bully the Giants' defensive line. Dexter Lawrence had nothing to show for it. Same with Thibodeau. And they got back to the running, what made them best. They ran the football over 200 yards between Sanders, Gainwell. You had to throw Scott in for one of the touchdowns because, be honest, guys, he's a giant killer. But you know what? It was exactly what they were meant to do. Coming into a division rival, they were the best team in the NFC all year. With that bye, getting a lot of people healthy, or at least close to 100% healthy. Jalen Hurts looked like the shoulder really wasn't bothering him that much. He scrambled. They called design runs for him. So you like to see that offense was kind of getting back into what they did best. I was happy to see Lane got through the game without any hiccups. He looked phenomenal. And let's go to the NFC Championship game, and someone's got to rock Purdy. And I'm seeing this game as this is an atmosphere that Purdy really hasn't been accustomed to. He had a great win last week at Dallas. Fortunately for him, he was home. And look, Dak was Dak. If Dak wasn't Dak and somehow played a good game, I think the Cowboys kind of come out with that as a win. But it was a close game until the end, and the Niners just kind of took over after Dak's turnovers. But I'm excited for them to be in the NFC Championship game, especially at home. Let's get to that weekend.
Yeah, Dallas just disappointing and undisciplined in big moments like always. Obviously, if you're following the account, that was clearly just fan frustration I was taking out on them. But it was expected, and we talked about it. The Niners are much more disciplined, extremely talented, and even though Brock Purdy's the less talented quarterback, but he doesn't make mistakes. And he didn't make mistakes against what is a really good defense that forces turnovers, creates pressure. Trent Williams, one pressure allowed in that game against Micah Parsons, kind of shut him down when he was rushing against him. They were able to hold back that Dallas defensive line for the most part. And I think that's something that's going to be a problem this weekend potentially. You've got that Eagles defensive line against that Niners offensive line. Honestly, in the trenches, both of these teams are phenomenal. You can argue, like the Niners have the best defensive lineman and best offensive lineman in this game. I think you can make that argument. But you actually mentioned Lane Johnson, who has allowed 0 pressures in 18 games this season. And I want to kind of talk about your tweet that I saw earlier today or yesterday where you kind of actually commented on a post of the top 10 players going into this weekend. And Lane Johnson was 6 or 7 in that post. And I thought your argument was pretty valid because when you removed him from that lineup, that's when their struggles happen. That's when there was a little more chaos on the back end. Yes, I think it was a small sample size. But when you remove Lane Johnson from that offensive line, problems get created. And he is a massive, massive part of this game. I think that Eagles offensive line in general is, because they've got to create enough time for Smith and Brown to break away from what is the number 1 defense in the league. They've got to make sure that they hold back Bosa, that line. I mean, do you see that line creating problems for the Eagles? I know they've got a top 2 or 3 offensive line. I mean, you're easily arguing it's potentially the best offensive line with Lane Johnson looking better, looking healthy. Kind of play devil's advocate. Like what problems get created for them this weekend, and what do they got to do to stop it?
Well, first we'll start with the Eagles offensive line versus the Niners defensive line. And look, your biggest Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead as well, and Fred Warner is a beast as a linebacker when he rushes as well. So what hopefully Jeff Stoutland and this offensive line will do well is, they pick up their double teams, but when they are going against, single man, and Bosa's mostly probably going to line up on the right side, I'm guessing, against Mailata, because unless he wants the Lane Johnson matchup. If he wants the Lane Johnson matchup and kind of test that abdominal, he can do that. But Mailata is going to have a huge game, and Dickerson as well, and they're going to have to stop Bosa. Bosa's the best in the league. He might win Defensive Player of the Year this year. He had 18.5 sacks. But that's going to be a tough matchup for this stout offensive line, and I'm really curious to see. This is what you want to see, though, when you get to these types of games. This NFC Championship game is going to come down to, like you said before, who makes the most mistakes and who wins in the trenches. And these are the top 2 teams that do that the best. So hopefully Purdy, for him to be able to make those mistakes. And now I'll switch over to the defensive line and against the Niners offensive line. Jonathan Gannon is going to have to prove his head coaching worth this week. Because, yes, he had a great, phenomenal game last week, but let's be honest, the Giants offense, he was able to kind of relax the secondary, kind of go man coverage and not do zone, because he was not worried about the Richie Jameses of the world and the Hodgins of the world. This week, it's going to be a lot tougher matchup. They like to run a lot of deep crossing routes across the field, but then you have to be worried about McCaffrey and Debo coming out of that backfield. So they're going to have to do a lot of stunts. They're going to have to get Reddick in motion. Sweat's gonna line up on Trent Williams all day. He likes that right side of that line going against the left side of the offensive line for 49ers. So hopefully he can get to Purdy and kind of make a mismatch against Trent Williams and have him just focus on him, that we can get other guys free, like the Brandon Grahams of the world, like the Reddicks of the world. But the matchup that I'm looking to see is, and they've been great all year, is Edwards and Kazir White. They have been tremendous linebackers for us all year. Kazir White in a contract year, he really showed his worth, and Edwards as well. It's going to be really tough to see who we bring back in the later years, and we'll obviously get into that in the offseason. But with McCaffrey and Debo coming out of the backfield, they're going to have to be on their horses all game. And you have CDJ coming in also. You have Epps as a safety that likes to line up close to the defensive line. They're going to have to get after him, and they're going to have to make tackles. They cannot have a missed tackle in the backfield, because that's where they're going to hurt you.
So, Rob, I'm going to toss it over to you now to talk a little bit about the Niners. Your pick to win this game going several weeks back at this point, and honestly, they've played the part. Brock Purdy has been able to hold back from making too many mistakes. We know what the rest of that team can do. I mean, we have 2 of the most talented rosters in the league going up against each other. 2 young quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts with a little more experience, but really not that much more experience, really just a year up on Purdy in terms of overall playing time. I do think Hurts and his experience, though, in kind of going through not the ringer last year, but having that year under his belt, having that playoff game under his belt, getting a playoff win last week, I do think that's got to give him a little bit of an edge versus Purdy. However, there's a lot more to this game than just those two. Matt kind of talked through the defensive and offensive lines, those matchups on his side. What were your thoughts on the Niners this past weekend, how they looked? Did you see anything that made you second guess your pick, or did it kind of verify, okay, yeah, these are the guys? I do still think they really win this game. And what do they got to kind of do to be able to beat the Eagles?
Yeah, so to answer that last question, no, I didn't see anything that, makes me hesitate to think that the Niners aren't my pick. I think the Eagles are really dang good, but if I look back at the bracket I made, obviously making an NFL playoff bracket is a little bit different than, a March Madness bracket where, higher seed goes to the lower seed, and vice versa. So I actually had the Cowboys going to Philly last week in my original bracket, and I had the Cowboys winning that game. I think the Cowboys are one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. I think the Niners and the Eagles are right there as well, but we saw the Cowboys get a win against the Eagles this year. Later in the year, I know the Eagles had not their full roster available, so it's a little bit skewed, but I did really like the Cowboys. I think that win for the 49ers. The biggest
piece of our roster.
I know, but you can't argue that. I know people are going to kill me for saying this. Minshew is a really good backup. I know he's not Jalen Hurts, but Minshew is a very comparable backup, if not the best backup in the league. So they still had a good shot there, and I think the Cowboys are really good. So I think that's a really good win for the 49ers to go up against the Eagles. I think the hardest part for the 49ers this week is going to be going to Philly, because I think that's a tough place to play. Like you said before, I think it's going to make Purdy a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm really not of the mind at this point to say that Brock Purdy's not ready. I know it sounds crazy. I know Mr. Irrelevant, you can say whatever you want about him, but he has proven it time and time again that he is good enough to, how good we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Cody. How good do you have to be to carry that offense? I mean, they're absolutely loaded at every position. You got Kittle, who's a top 3 tight end. You got probably a top 5 wide receiver duo in Ayuk and Debo, and then you got Christian McCaffrey, who's always been a top 3, top 5 running back, in the NFL. So with Trent Williams, who's arguably one of the best offensive linemen in the game, so there is plenty of talent surrounded by Purdy that I think he just has to be average to, I don't even want to say I think slightly below average is even fine. If he can just not turn the ball over, which I think is the biggest thing, then I think they have a legitimate shot on offense. And then the defensive side, I really do, I watch Nick Bosa every week and I'm amazed. Like, the guy touches the quarterback in some capacity every single snap. Now you could say that, Jalen Hurts has legs, he can move. I think that's where the biggest thing comes into play. I think the 49ers linebackers have the ability to get after Hurts and to keep up with him with his speed. I think Fred Warner is absolute animal. You saw him, how quickly he got back in coverage against CeeDee Lamb last week on that one play that probably saved the touchdown, which was a critical play in the game. So there's a lot of good pieces on that 49ers defense that I think are going to frustrate the Eagles. And the last thing I'll say, and I know this is, probably an ego thing and whatever, definitely did not like what I saw from A.J. Brown at the end of that game last week, kind of pouting on the sideline after his team just won by 30 points, just because he didn't have a good statistical game, it sounded like. That's something that can happen in the playoffs. You have to put all that stuff aside, especially when you're playing to go to the Super Bowl. So I'm sure they got in his ear after that. He'll be fine, but I think there's a lot, this is probably the best match. I mean, it certainly is the best matchup you'll see out of the NFC. This is what you want to see. Despite me thinking, the Cowboys are just as good, I think this is a very comparable matchup. I think there's probably going to be more points this week than there was last week with the Cowboys. I think that's something that the Niners are going to have to do to stay with the Eagles is score some points. So they're certainly capable of it. But I think the key is, Brock Purdy not making mistakes, not making turnovers. If he can do that, I think they have a really good shot. And then those linebackers, they got to get after Hurts and make him work a little bit. But I think it's going to be a fantastic game regardless.
One of the interesting things before I toss it over to you, Matt, Brock Purdy faced the number 2 team in sack percentage last week in the Dallas Cowboys. This week he goes up against the number 1 team in the Philadelphia Eagles. They lead the league in sack percentage. Rob, you to your point of how good you have to be to carry this team to the Super Bowl, it's almost like those – I always hate these Tom Brady comparisons. This isn't even a Brady comparison. It's just a comparison to those teams that have carried a quarterback, like when the Pats had really good defenses in the early 2000s. We saw the Broncos carry a just absolutely injured end of his career Peyton Manning to a Super Bowl with that roster as well. We do see it every few years where even the Niners a few years ago, I think you could argue even then that when they lost to the Chiefs, like they did it with a really good roster. And you just got to limit mistakes. You got to follow the script that Shanahan lays out. Don't be an idiot. Don't stray off of it. Follow the script. And when things break down, remain calm and just make the intelligent play. Like Brock Purdy clearly, I mean, he was Mr. Irrelevant because of not just his overall profile, but it's those raw skills. Like he's not going to just fling the ball downfield 50, 60 yards with the flick of his wrist. He's not going to do incredible things, but he's also not making mistakes. So this week he faces the number 1 team in sack percentage, and it's by a wide margin, 11% versus 9% with the Cowboys, which, when we're looking at these margins, that's a pretty massive gap. I think that's what the Eagles got to do to get to him if they're going to create those mistakes, because he has not made them to date. Now, A.J. Brown, Matt, let me get your thoughts on that as well. How did you feel about that? Is this something you just kind of brush off? Are we going to see a squeaky wheel narrative this week in the playoffs, which is pretty rare, or does he just buy in and get after it? Like, you think it's a problem?
I don't think it's a problem at all. And I saw it. We all obviously saw the game and saw it, unfold on the sideline. I think I even tweeted too that, I saw that he was visibly upset. He said all year long, he's happy to be here. He thinks Philly's lit. He loves the atmosphere at the games. And knowing him and knowing Jalen Hurts and the leadership on that team, he probably just wanted to show what they got in him for his first playoff game at the Link. And maybe that got him a little upset because they went to Devontae Smith, even though he had a great block on that Devontae Smith touchdown. I think the leadership with you have Kelsey, you have obviously guys that have been there before that have won a Super Bowl. They definitely got in his ear, like Rob had mentioned, and just said, hey, look, you're not going to have the best statistical game, but you just put up over how many yards of offense, close to 400 yards of offense. You completely dismantled your division rival in the divisional round of the playoffs. Not even close. Look, this is a team effort. I know that he spoke to the reporters the other day. I have no issues at all with this, especially the friendship that Jalen Hurts and him have. He was probably just disappointed in himself that he wasn't able to show what they got when they signed him with that 4-year, $100 million deal. It was his first game at the Link. He probably wanted to get after it a little bit more, but maybe the defense didn't give him that. Martingale probably didn't want him to get him open, so they probably double-teamed him a lot. That left Devontae Smith open. Those are the looks they were getting, and they kind of focused on the run halfway through the game because they were up 28-0. So I'm not worried about that at all. Like Rob was saying with this 49ers team, this is the matchup we looked at in the beginning of the playoffs where we would hope that we kind of got lucky where maybe they threw a dud against another team that we matched up better against. This is the matchup that we maybe wanted to shy away from, but we also embrace because it is the top 2 teams in the NFC, and what better way to prove who's better. So I think the Shanahan and D'Amico Ryans, who has done a great job with that defense, so he's probably going to be a head coach next year as well. It's going to be up to the coaches too, and who kind of adapts and adjusts throughout the game. And I am really curious to see how Sirianni, Steichen, and Gannon kind of come out and adjust, because Gannon is supposedly on the top list of all these teams for a head coaching job, and he's going to have to prove that. And a lot of teams are going to be watching. I hope that he does well. And you always like to see when coaches go other places. You hate to lose people, but that's the state of the NFL. I love the matchups that we're going to be seeing this week. This is, top, even when you go through the top 100 players in the offseason and you see all the top players, a lot of those guys that we're watching this weekend are going to be on that list. I mean, you got Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, and Hassan Reddick. You're going against Trent Williams in a great offensive line. Same on the other side. You got Nick Bosa, who might line up against Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata all game, and even Jason Kelce on the inside. Like, you want to see those matchups, and you want to see who wins. And look, if Lane wins 5 out of 10 times and Bosa wins 5 out of 10 times, then look, those are the reason why they're the best in the league. So I'm really excited for the game as well. I think it's going to be close. I think the line is perfect. And the only thing I don't agree with him with is that the Eagles are going to advance to the Super Bowl.
Well, I'm going to fire off a few interesting stats on this matchup, and then I'm going to toss it to you guys for final thoughts on this one, if you have any, and give me your score prediction for this one as well. I already know where you lean for the picks, so have your score ready for me. Any final thoughts to wrap up this game here? I do want to note this is couple of our top defenses overall, but also a couple of our top teams. According to Pro Football Focus, you got the Niners 3rd overall, Philly 6th overall in terms of their power rankings. 1st and 2nd defensively. 1st is obviously the Niners in pretty much every single metric. You got Philly sitting there 2nd. And in terms of overall offense, you got the Niners 4th and Philly 8th. I know they're going off of a lot of data. I would imagine that would be flipped there, but always interesting to see those numbers. When you flip over to Pro Football Reference, just some great references here in terms of offense. You have in these two teams, you have the number 4 overall offense in yards in the Eagles, number 8 in the Niners. In terms of actual yards per play, both of them are going to be in that top 10 as well. We know they both have top 15 passing offenses, and we know those rushing offenses. Philly, I think, might surprise some people, has actually been a more successful overall rushing offense in terms of overall yards, probably playing with the lead a lot, how good they were early in the season, just ahead of the Niners there, but both of them about even with yards per attempt. But when you flip over to defense, a couple interesting things here. Obviously, the Niners are number 1 overall in defense. Philly's right there behind them. In terms of actual rushing defense, there seems to be a little bit of a weakness with Philly. I actually didn't realize they're allowing the 9th most yards per attempt. Obviously, the Niners are at the bottom of the league, 2nd best in yards per attempt allowed. Right there at 3.4 yards per rush allowed. Eagles going up against that Niners rushing offense, that could potentially pose a problem early in the game if they're forced to play from behind. I did not realize that they give up the 9th most yards per attempt. Now, we'll see if that becomes a moot point. They played in a lot of odd games where, it was a blowout. Teams might have, melded in, backups are in, etc. There's a lot of context there. So obviously this game's going to be close. We get great weather here. I have the Eagles in the Super Bowl. I think they still come out on top. I'm going to go with a nice 28-24 win here for the Eagles myself. Rob, give me your prediction. Then Matt, take us home with this game.
I'm going to go reverse, actually. 28-24 49ers going to the Super Bowl. That's what I'm going with.
I'm obviously going with the Eagles, and I'm going to throw out that it's going to be a 28-27. Niners will cover. We'll get the win, and we're going to have a last drive touchdown with 2 minutes remaining.
I think it's going to be an absolute thriller in Philadelphia. Bengals and Chiefs. Rob, your Bengals. I'm going to toss it over to you first. Yeah. Just go with it. Just go with it.
My Bengals. I wish I was a Bengals fan sometimes. Mostly every Sunday. But I love I love them. I love Burrow. Gosh, they are just so fun to watch. I say it. I've been saying it for a long time that I think the Bengals are the best team in the NFL. I think they have played that way the last probably 10 weeks or so in the NFL. We talked about at one point, I think it was their last maybe 7 or 8 games that they had a legitimate shot to finish the season 7-0 or whatever it was, 8-0. And they did that, and they continue to keep that streak going. They're up to 10 now with 2 playoff wins, so I don't think they're slowing down. The The only thing I don't like is how kind of, I don't want to say how confident they are, but how like kind of cocky it's become and arrogant on social media. They've been saying Arrowhead is, I don't know if you guys saw this, they're calling it Burrowhead because he owns Patrick Mahomes. I don't like that stuff going into these type of games, especially the magnitude and especially the kind of guy you're playing in Patrick Mahomes. I don't think Mahomes is really going to slow down much with the ankle injury. It sounds like it's not that big of a deal. Most people that I heard earlier in the week were saying that could be a major factor. It sounds like it's not going to be. So I think we just have a really great game ahead of us, both sides, AFC and NFC championships. And I think we're going to get a similar result as we've gotten in the past. Bengals obviously 3-0 in those matchups between Burrow and Mahomes. All three games have come down to 3 points, believe it or not. So I think we're going to see something very similar. I think we're going to see high scoring, fast-paced, offensively loaded teams that are just going head to head. And I'm stoked for this one. I think I really do think the Bengals are the better team, though. I think they're playing better right now. I think they have more confidence. If this game was in Cincinnati, I would say it's an absolute no-brainer for me. I think the Chiefs can absolutely win, but I'm going to take the Bengals. I think Joe Burrow is the best player in the world right now. I think he's playing that way. He's playing with a certain confidence, certain swag that you absolutely need in the playoffs. He's the swag king in the NFL. We've seen it time and time again. And I think they're going to win this game, move on to the Super Bowl, and I do think they're going to get the job done this year. So we will see, but I'm stoked for this game. I think there's going to be a lot of I think it's going to look a lot like, obviously can't look as exciting as that Bills-Chiefs game last year. I think it's going to look a lot like that as far as offensively. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored, and I think it's going to be really fast-paced.
Yeah, I can't imagine that this is a similar blowout like we saw last week there in Buffalo. I mean, that was stunning in and of itself, the fact that it wasn't close. We talked about going into it where, you know, Bengals was going in with a chip on their shoulder. The stupid ticket sales going on, like you're giving people motivation. Now you kind of see some of that reverse.
Yeah.
I actually saw a Chiefs defensive player when asked what scares him about the Bengals offense, he said nothing. I mean, I think, you know, at that point, I think that's stupid as well, because you just watched Buffalo inadvertently, you know, the NFL and Buffalo themselves give Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals plenty of fuel, plenty of motivation that they probably didn't even need. And now you turn around doing it again. I mean, with Mahomes hobbled. I mean, how big of a difference do you think it makes for Mahomes in terms of playing with a high ankle sprain? He's been practicing and everything, which is kind of surprising that he's been putting in full practices and wasn't even limping when I saw that video of him yesterday. I was kind of surprised because a high ankle sprain is, I mean, that's pretty brutal. You know, I mean, that's really painful. And so I don't know.
Yeah, I saw that report and I was shocked that he seems to be doing so well, because it sounds, you know, from what I've heard in the past, high ankle sprains take some time to heal. You know, guys can be out for months from a high ankle sprain. It's not your typical sprain. So I think, you know, if the stories are true where, you know, NFL personnel just shoots people up with drugs where the pain is, then I think that's what they're going to do. I think he's going to get out there, he's going to roll out there, and he's going to be fine. I think I'm not too worried about Mahomes. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference in his play. I think when he scrambles, he really only scrambles when it's absolutely necessary. He's really good in the pocket, but again, it doesn't sound like it's really bothering him that much, and he's certainly going to be on some painkillers. So I don't even think he'll feel it at that point with the adrenaline as well. So to your point, though, I don't love the commentary. That's why I said that about the Bengals, kind of challenging, you know, the Chiefs and saying that they own the Chiefs. That kind of stuff in the playoffs doesn't usually bode well. Sounds like the Chiefs are doing a little bit, you know, right back at the Bengals. So I guess it goes both ways. But one thing I wanted to note was, as much as we were high on the Bills this year, particularly in the first half of the year, I think if the Bills went to Arrowhead, or I guess it would have been a neutral site, I don't think they would have gotten close to beating the Chiefs after what we saw from the Bills. Like, I think the Chiefs are well ahead of the Bills. I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with the Bills. I think they looked really good at times, but I think it's a lot of Josh Allen, we need you to be Superman, like every single drive. And I think that ran out. And he obviously saw he struggled with the turnovers and a little bit of confidence. And you know, he goes to his guy Diggs more than anyone in the league, but they obviously had they were drawing on the sideline, or Diggs at least was. So, you know, I don't think this would have been the same matchup we would have expected from the Bills and Chiefs last year. So I'm kind of happy that it is the Bengals, and I think it'll be just as good, if not, you know, I'm not going to say better because that was probably the best game of all time, but I think it's going to be a really good one and a lot of excitement. I don't really see why it wouldn't be. Both defenses are good. I think they're underrated defenses, but I think their offenses are probably two of the best in the league. So when you have that kind of chemistry, that kind of mixture in a playoff game that's to go to the Super Bowl, I think it gets really exciting, and a lot of points there's potential for a lot of points to go up.
Well, and Matt, I appreciate you hanging back here with us. I'm going to toss it over to you in just a moment. But Rob, yeah, I would expect points because you have these two of the top three teams in pass rate over expectation. Bengals have continued to tick that up. And I mean, you have the top two quarterbacks in the league right now. Burrow is currently the second number two graded quarterback on Pro Football Focus, and he'd be number one. He's number one since they went on that tear. Pretty much since week 3, he's number one after that 0-2 start. So you also have these two teams lead the league in passing touchdowns. In terms of their overall scoring drives, the Chiefs, 46% of their drives are ending in a score right now. That's good for number one. The Bengals 7th, 41.5% of their drives are ending in a score. Both of these offenses are just absolutely incredible. We've seen these defenses actually step up this year. I think a stunning number I threw out to you a couple weeks ago, Rob, was the Chiefs being 4th overall, according to Pro Football Focus. They still are. Bengals are also a top 10 defense this year. That's something they've done consistently. And that last year, they only did it to close out the season than going into the playoffs. This year, they've done it consistently, much stronger there on the defensive side of the ball. They're also top 10 graded defenses. I think that's potentially a low-key storyline going into this game with these two is, can one of these defenses actually step up? And it's not like they're just terrible defenses either. Like in the past, we would fully expect a 40 to 34 type of game or even more. So, Matt, I want to kind of get your general thoughts on this game, but also kind of want to know, just from like a football perspective, I think you're pretty unbiased on the AFC, being a Philly fan. Like Buffalo, you don't have to go too much into Buffalo, but did they get exposed? Did they not show up? Like, do you think the Bengals just kicked it into another gear, or was it more Buffalo just was a total letdown?
I think it was more of Buffalo just being a total letdown. I do think the Bengals are a better team than the Bills, especially at this point in the season, but not to literally dismantle the Bills at home. I mean, Josh Allen could not even have any time to get to Diggs. And I know that Diggs was very upset with how the game obviously ended. He's a fiery competitor, every right to be. But watching that game, they just let Josh Allen – they didn't let Josh Allen do what Josh Allen does, and it paid dividends for them. And especially that they got the run game going with Mixon. Chase was Chase. Higgins was Higgins. And look, Burrow doesn't lose when the game is on the line, or when the game is of that caliber. We know he lost in the Super Bowl, but he even was mounting a comeback in that as well. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for him. But this has been Joe Burrow since college. And I'll get into the Chiefs game because I do think the Chiefs are going to win this game. If you want to, with this ankle injury now with Mahomes, if you want to say that this game coming up, I think it's going to be like the Michael Jordan flu game for him. He's a top NFL star, and at his position, he's the face of the league. It's his time, and I know that Burrow is coming along, and Burrow is a face of the league as well. And we're going to have the next Manning versus Brady in the AFC, and I get all that. But especially what Rob said, too, they're acting awfully confident. I wouldn't really be calling Arrowhead Burrow land, especially when that's going to be very, very loud. But also, I don't like how you said that I might be a little unbiased because I'm an Eagles fan. But look, I do love me some Andy Reid. I do love me some Big Red. So hopefully he gets his cheeseburger at the end of this game. But trying to beat that man,
that's true.
Trying to beat that man 4 times. And is very difficult. He's a great coach. He's going to kind of disguise what he's doing. And what look, is there really any better duo right now than Mahomes and Kelsey? I mean, every time I watch that game, watch them play, Kelsey is wide open. And I know it's a scheme and everything like that. And Kelsey's a great player and his ability to run routes as a tight end, but he is strictly always open. No one can cover him at all. And I think that they're just going to kind of match up against the Bengals, keep up with them, and score as much as the Bengals are going to score, because I do think it's going to be an offensive juggernaut of a game. On paper, you'll obviously take Chase, Higgins, and Mixon all day over the skill positions for the Chiefs. But the ability for Andy Reid to kind of get everybody in open space and scheme up a game, I do think the Chiefs are gonna come out with this one. They're gonna represent the AFC, and we're gonna see both Kelsey brothers in the Super Bowl, and we're gonna see what maybe we never thought we would see would be Andy Reid playing against the Eagles.
That would actually be why. How would you feel about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I want the Eagles to win, but I don't know. Look, it sucks because it was the right move at the time to kind of move on from him after 14 seasons. Maybe not move on from him to Chip Kelly, but that happened. But it was the right time. You just hate to see how much he's taken that Chiefs franchise now. I mean, he's only been a head coach for 2 teams, and they're always in it. They're always in the playoffs. They're always in the games. It's rare that he misses the playoffs. So, look, we got a Super Bowl out of Doug, who's an Andy Reid disciple. And, look, that's all we could really ask for. But I hope I could see my Eagles in a Super Bowl 2 times in 5 years pretty much. And it would be a joy to kind of watch them go up against Andy Reid. I mean, I think that would be pretty cool. It'll be a good story for the NFL as well. And you got the Kelsey brothers, too. They're always fun.
Oh yeah, they're great, entertaining, and that would certainly be fun leading up to it. Look, it was a breakup that worked for both parties, honestly, because the Chiefs have been probably the best franchise in the league over the course of the last decade, and then once they got Mahomes, they were just. I mean, obviously the Pats were in the front half of that, but even with Alex Smith, they're extremely good. And, of course, your Eagles have been just fine as a franchise, retooling after a Super Bowl and right on the fringes of another one. So that's one of those rare instances where it worked out for both parties. You mentioned that offense in the skill position. It's kind of mind-blowing. I don't know if you got any thoughts on this, Rob, that this is Mahomes' most efficient offense, averaging 6.4 yards per play. And this is the most efficient offense that they've had in his time there. It seems like he's kind of fitting in a little more maybe more mature, not fitting in with the system, but being more mature, trusting the system, kind of think through his leads, not having to hit the home run every single time. And obviously with those skill position players, you can't hit the home run every single time, but they're number 1 in yards per play, most efficient offense he's had, best offense this year. It's kind of mind. I mean, like, Rob, is that more of a regular season stat? I mean, I'm assuming you kind of you think this been a bit of a blowout, but do you think the Bengals can kind of expose some of that where they're just really untalented outside of Kelsey?
Yeah, and that's the point I kind of wanted to make when you said that, Matt, and I heard it on the radio this morning, so it's not fully my, that's my source. But anyway, the Bengals have done a really good job scheming up against Kelsey in the last 3 meetings. Outside of that AFC Championship last year, Kelsey's only his highest, out of the other 2 games, he had 56 yards and 25 yards receiving. So that's certainly not standard Travis Kelsey. When you think Kelsey, he's pretty much over 100 and close to 10 receptions, it feels like, every game. So they've made that a priority, and I think that's absolutely what they have to do. I think any team that plays against the Chiefs has to key in on Kelsey. That's Mahomes' number 1 option. Every single play, doesn't matter what the play is. So they've done a really good job there. I think if they can manage to keep him, I don't even want to talk stats, but out of the end zone more than once, like, I think they have a legitimate shot. It feels a lot like, the Bills, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and then everyone else is kind of like, they show up sometimes, they might have, like, Gabe Davis feels like he has 1 game where he's 250 and 2 touchdowns, and then 5 weeks he's like disappeared. So I feel like that's a lot like the Chiefs, whereas as opposed to the Bengals, who have a lot of different options. You got Mixon, you got Chase, you got Higgins, you got Boyd. They have, guys all over the field. So even Hayden Hurst has been really good for them too. So that's why I like the Bengals. I think it's going to be an offensive game, and I think the Bengals have more of a more weapons on offense. And Burrow just looks different to me this year. He looks different to me the last couple of games. And I think he's just taking advantage of his opportunities. And even like Matt, you made a point about T. Higgins before. T. Higgins really, they didn't need him last week. Like he didn't do that much. I think he had like 40 yards or something like that. T. Higgins has not blown up in the last couple of weeks, and you're kind of just waiting for that at this point. These are the type of games that Chase goes for 100, Higgins goes for a touchdown or two. Like I think that's what it's going to be, and I hope it is. But I think it all comes down to containing Kelce to a reasonable amount. Even if he has 100 yards, like last year in the AFC Championship, he had 100 yards and a touchdown. So like that's fine. The Bengals still won, but he can't go for these games where he has 15 receptions for 180 and two plus touchdowns, whatever it is. So it absolutely comes down to Kelce. And, I just fear like if Mahomes gets hit a certain way, like I feel like we've seen that so many times in the past where a guy is like 50-50 or they say he's, 70-30 feeling good and he gets hit one time and that ankle gets tweaked and like you don't know how much that makes a difference. So I think regardless it's going to be a great game. But yeah, to your point, I think it comes down to scheming against Kelce, and they've done that successfully in the last 3 meetings to Kelce's standards, holding him to minimal damage. So
looking Joe Burrow in the eye at this point is like looking death straight in the eye. We honestly have 2 quarterbacks that you just don't bet against. That's what's so crazy about this matchup is like the Eagles-Niners one is difficult to dissect because those rosters are so talented and so good. And you're like, okay, which quarterback makes the fewest mistakes? Whereas this one is you have 2 guys that you just don't bet against, period. But you got to bet against one. And it does kind of feel like Burrow's just so locked in. That Mahomes injury kind of scares you a little bit. It's really going to be interesting, man, if he can't stay healthy. I think the worst thing this weekend, just for as a fan and just as a viewer, is seeing Mahomes get dinged up early and either have to sit out some drives or really visibly hobble through that because you want to see these guys at their absolute best. So, I don't know, load him up with drugs, whatever you got to do, play pain-free. Run around on one leg. I mean, you just want to see these guys at their best. That's what we're hoping for. But Matt, any final thoughts on this game? You said you had the Chiefs. Give me a score prediction and any final thoughts you have on it.
My score prediction will be 35 Chiefs, and I'll go with anything like you were saying before, how this is the most proficient offense that he's been a part of. If you look back at those Eagles teams back in the day with Andy Reid, they had great players, but besides of bringing in T.O. and then towards the later end when he had McCoy and Deshaun Jackson, but you had guys like Todd Pinkston, you had guys like Freddie Mitchell that were just good players, and even Brian Westbrook, like a great running back. But Andy Reid was just able to scheme up his offense where two of those players. And Rob made great points with Travis Kelce. I think if the Chiefs can win on third down, and I know that's a thing that you can say about any team. If you win on third down and win the turnover battle, you have a great chance at winning. But if Kelce can do the damage on third down, where like you kind of have Mahomes pinned down, and then all of a sudden Kelce gets open and he converts to third down, I think that's what's going to hurt the Bengals in the long run. And I think it's going to be an offensive game. And look, I got 35-30 Chiefs.
What say you, Rob?
I'm close, as similar to the Niners pick. I think I got 34-28 Bengals. I think it's going to come down to the Bengals scored and, there's a quick 2-minute drill for the Chiefs and something goes wrong. And I think the Bengals will get out of there with a win. But how can you – even that feels generous, a 6-point win. So it's like the last 3 meetings have been within 3. I could easily see this one being within 3 again. So, yeah, it's going to be a heck of a game. I'm going to go Joe Burrow, though. I cannot bet against him. Like you said, it's hard to bet against either guy. But what I'm seeing from Burrow this year is just different. It's hard to even say that with the year Mahomes has had, his most efficient year. And I'm still picking Joe Burrow. But that's how confident I am in him. That's how confident I think he is in himself. And that team is just flowing with confidence right now. If they make, like you said, less mistakes, I think it's going to be less about making less mistakes and more about who can put up more points. So it's going to be a wild one. I just have that feeling. And if it's not, I'm going to be really disappointed. But I still think the Bengals are going to take this one. I don't think it's going to be a 12-9 game. There's no way. There's just too much talent all over the field. And but I'm going with my guy Joe Burrow to go to the Super Bowl.
That would be hilarious if it was hilarious.
I mean, that's happened in the past. It's like we've talked about certain games, certain matchups, and we're like, oh, it's going to be 45-38, whatever, and it's like, yeah, it was 12-6. It's awful, but I can't see that happening. I think both quarterbacks are too good, and if they stay healthy, if Mahomes stay healthy, I hope he does. I never root for injuries. I think that'll really spice up the game too if he stays out there the whole time and stays efficient. So, to Matt's point, I think it comes down to Kelsey scheming up against him, and these quarterbacks just have to duke it out.
I think it's potentially a weekend where we actually see these defenses step up. I think both of them actually do. I don't know which one gets the victory out of it, but I do actually think we see a slightly lower scoring game than a lot of us are expecting. It's more of a gut feel because this is obviously the two best offenses in the league, now that Buffalo's out of it. But I think these defenses just do something to kind of step up. We tend to see that often in the playoffs where these teams have not been good defensively. However, these teams have been good defensively and they're still not being talked about. I think they step up. I think sometimes we forget that, there's pros over on that side of the field too, especially the way these teams fling it around. There's going to be opportunities to create a little havoc and turnovers. I do think we see some mistakes here, but it's just a byproduct of how exciting these offenses can be. And if those defenses can force a couple turnovers, I do think we see a lower scoring ball game. But it's going to be tough, man. I think I got to go 24-21 Bengals. And when I say lower scoring, I don't mean like 12-9 or anything like that. I mean keeping it out of the 30s and both teams in the low 20s. Man, I had the Bengals out last week, but I guess at this point I'm done betting against Burrow. So I'll go with the Bengals as well. It's just hard to look at them right now and bet against them. Just a little bit harder to do that than it is against Mahomes. But honestly, it's going to be great football this weekend, regardless of what happens, fellas. I appreciate both of you jumping on here. You know where you can find Matt at Eagle Up Pod on Twitter. Go check him out. Eagle Up Podcast, talking all things Philadelphia Eagles. Going to be following it closely. Matt, best of luck to your Eagles, man. Hopefully you get to be talking about another Super Bowl appearance, second in the last 5 years, come this time next week. I know that would certainly be exciting. I live in the Philadelphia area, so I'll be getting an earful at work. Can't wait for that if they pull out the win. I do have them in the Super Bowl as well. So, Rob, appreciate you jumping on as always, man. At Rob McW24, you can find us at Roster Up Media, rosterupmedia.com. And plenty of team podcasts out there. If your team's eliminated, be on the lookout for off-season content. Fellas, thanks for hopping on. Everyone else, thanks for tuning in.